Say it's quite rare to watch a top grandmaster play not only against the general population, and by that I mean obviously the 1000s of the world, the 1500s of the world, the 200s of the world. That's strange on its own, but it's also very strange when one of these top grandmasters blunders a full queen, like completely for 0, 9 points given away for 0 in return. Well, today you're actually going to get both of those in one video. Now, I'm going to show you this game that was played between Super GM, Anish Giri, and the world of Twitter. Anish took to Twitter while supposedly waiting in a long line at some sort of, I don't know, maybe it was a transportation hub, maybe it was an ice cream shop, maybe it was, I don't know. I don't know where Anish was, but Anish decided to take on the world of Twitter, his followers, and he just retweeted people who made moves. So in this video, I'm going to take you through this game. And also, we got Jake Paul here trending on Twitter, which, that's good. This game, before we get into it, I just want to say will absolutely make you stupider as a human being. So please do not be mad at me. It's one of the most disgusting pieces of chess I've ever seen. So let's just watch. We're going to look at it from the perspective of Anish, obviously, because he is the stronger player. So the world of Twitter began with the move h4, as you saw from the Twitter feed. h4 is an interesting move. It's very edgy. And obviously the idea is to bring the rook into the center line through the third rank. It's not the worst move in the world. I think of all of White's 20 starting moves between the pawns and the knights, it's in the bottom half for sure, but it's not terrible. Anish responds in principle with playing the move e5, best by test. It's basically like you're playing white now, and your opponent moved the h-pawn. At this point, it's not too late for the Twitter noobs to go back to playing in the center of the board and try to justify this move later. For example, what I mean by that is, maybe Anish accidentally blunders his bishop. Like maybe this h-pawn actually ends up trapping this bishop. You never know when idiocy can actually pay off. Yeah, Anish is a little bit stronger than that, and will not fall for that. The Twitter world continues with the move rook to h3. Let's also keep in mind that Anish is actively retweeting different people. So these are different people suggesting these moves. And of course, when you have the option to put 2 pawns in the center, more often than not, it is going to be the right decision. And therefore, here it is. Now, here, the Twitter noobs failed to implement the step 3 of a 3-step plan, which is 66.7%, which, if some processes in the world worked 67% of the time, it would be not so bad, like the New York City subway arriving on time. Other things would not be good. Heart surgery, blundering rooks in chess, and other things that are equally important. So, the world plays e3, trying to copy Anish's strategy of playing in the center, and simply gives away the rook. The problem is that you don't just give away the rook. When the bishop took the rook no longer defends h4, and because Anish played the move e5 a while ago, he now proceeds with queen takes h4. After 4 moves, Anish Giri has a 3-point material advantage. I mean, honestly, it's quite impressive, but here it gets even worse. So at this point, the Twitter noobs abandon all hopes of trying to actually defeat Anish Giri, and they proceed to implement a new phase of the game, which is called the meme phase. So now, rather than developing anything in the middle, developing a knight, bishop, queen, they move the king to e2. Make no mistake, of all the moves that White could have played in this position, this is certainly not the worst. The worst, of course, would have been going for the bow test strategy. But of all the moves that don't blunder a piece of material, this is most certainly the worst move. Because it blocks both your queen and your bishop, and it just activates your king, and he's not really trying to be involved in this game. Anish, of course, being a man of chess principles, develops a knight to the middle of the board. There is nothing you can really complain about here. And here on move 6, I think the world plays their best move thus far. It's not an impressive move by any stretch of the imagination. It's pawn to c3, but of all the moves they've played, this one is by far the least idiotic. So far, we have dealt with a flank pawn opening, a rook out, blundering that rook, giving up the pawn, and moving a king out. So I would say that compared to all those moves, this move is definitely of a higher quality. Here, the world plays queen to e1. which I'm not going to lie, if you offered me a 7-figure payday, I would not be able to explain this move to you. 8 figures, I might conjure up something. Queen to e1 is a fascinating move, and I can only imagine that they wanted to replace the king and the queen's home squares, because, again, they have entered the meme phase of the game. Anish here plays a very good move, and actually, as stupid as this game is, don't click out yet, trust me, we're not done. As stupid as this game is, this is actually very smart. When the king is in the middle of the board and you have castled already, you want to open up that middle of the board, and that's why you play the move d4, because you want to open things up. Now, here what white should do is probably trade queens. On the one hand, in chess, I say not to trade when you're losing in terms of material. On the other hand, if you're being attacked, you might want to remove your opponent's most aggressive piece. So f3 actually wouldn't be the worst move. Another idea is to go d3, because as I say, you want to close the center. If your opponent's trying to attack you, closing the center might actually be your best bet, especially if your king is in the middle. But we'll see. Now here, I just mentioned that queen to e1 was played in order to play king back to d1. Well, yeah, here the Twitter universe plays an interesting move, king to d3. King d3 walks directly into the line of assault, and now the advantage for black after only playing 7 moves, black has only played 7 moves, has an advantage of -20 according to Stockfish, because of various infiltrations. For example, e4 and d3 just completely locks down the white position forever. Or, as Anish plays in this game, he takes on c3 because that activates his rook. Every time a pawn moves, you really want to keep in mind how it affects the other pieces. Now, in this position, of course, the king could take the pawn, and in fact has to, even though everything else can. We have to not forget that the king is in check. But for some reason, the universe of Twitter goes back to e2. At this point, Anish most certainly begins feeling bad for the bozos that are trying to play against him. However, he has to counterbalance that with the fact that he is probably in line where, in an establishment where the line will most certainly be getting shorter and shorter. So although Anish would like to prolong the misery, or perhaps the content, or perhaps give his opponents a chance, he needs to end things quickly. And so for that reason, he plays queen c4, missing knight d4 check, actually. The move knight d4 check here would have been the best move. The point is that if king d1, c2 is mate, and if pawn takes knight, in this position there is a mate in 2, a very beautiful mate in 2. You can pause here and try to find it. As idiotic as this game is, I will be using that word liberally today. As idiotic as this game is, there actually are some, cool tactical patterns here, so you can feel free to pause. The move here is queen to e4, and by pure geometry, the king is forced back to this square, and now c2 is mate. What a brutal mate. I mean, that pawn is pretending like it belongs on the second rank with its counterparts, Among Us style. Well, Anish misses knight d4 check because even though he's obviously 2770 and top 10 in the world, he hasn't been doing his puzzles training, so he plays the move queen c4 check, of course hoping for king d1 and mate this way. But the world here sacrifices a pawn and runs their king out to f3. Now, when this king moves, right, you want to play e4 check, but you really don't want the king to run back this way. That would make for an entirely separate new game. And so Anish here plays the move bishop to d6, anticipating the king's escape and trying to get e4, which would completely prevent the king from escaping at all. Except for the fact that now Anish hangs his queen in one move. Yes, if you were patient enough not to click off of this video, because, some people on YouTube are a little bit possessive of content. If there's something that they don't personally like, they get very mad. And then they just make a big uproar about it and go away. So if you have not clicked off of this video in sheer outrage, disgust, disappointment, or any other emotion, then you are in for a good piece of content, because our protagonist, or antagonist, depending on what you think about Anish, is no longer in possession of his most powerful piece, and he is completely lost. Make no mistake, this king is really bad and has been kicked around the entire game, but one guy has a queen. Well, I suppose the world has a queen and the other guy doesn't. So knight f6, knight c3. Now what? I mean, what is Anish going to do with these two knights, the bishop, and the rooks? Well, he plays the move rook e8. I mean, it's never too late to bring the final piece of the party to the table. Here, what white should do, in my opinion, is one of two things. White should immediately rush to exchange the pieces. The less pieces that Anish has, obviously the less that he can do to you, considering he really only has 5 things of value here. The pawns aren't very valuable. The other thing that white can do here is play g3 and hide the king on g2. The king will be permanently safe. None of the black pieces will get there because none of them are really equipped for heavy artillery battle. But here, the world plays a really interesting move, and by the world plays a really interesting move, I mean Anish basically selected someone who played a really bad move, and he retweeted them, and that move is a4. I mean, a4, you could do anything in this position. Literally, white could play any move here and be fine, because you cannot lose the queen, and if you lose the knight in one move, big deal, you're still up a queen. So a4 is a fascinating move. Anish here activates his bishop, pinning the knight to the queen, but it's worse than that. He also activates the rook. And here, the world plays, for like the 4th time this game, king to e2. I think they've played that a multitude of times at this point. So king to e2 moves the king back and defends the bishop. Anish plays e4, and the bishop moves back to c2. Now, white needs to continue to make progress into the white position without losing any material, and so Anish does that with the move knight to e5. Notice his last few moves have worked together. First, he brought the rook supports the pawn, then he moved the bishop pins the knight to the queen, and now he plays e4, and now, behind where that pawn used to be, goes the knight, and the knight is ready to go down to this square. In this position, it looks like white can win this pawn, which would be really nice, except white would simply be losing a queen. So, the world here can develop the dark squared bishop, can get the knight back into the game, can continue to safeguard the king or the queen. The world chooses to play the move a5. a5 is a really, it's a provocative move. Obviously, you are intending a6 in the future to open up the a file and launch an attack on the castled king. You also have the a4 square for all 3 pieces. Rook a4, as we know from the music video of Young Elo, is never a move that can be discredited. It also actually has a lot of merit in this position, not to mention the fact that you already moved the rook out laterally from that side, so definitely rook a4 is on the table. Anish here finishes up his plan with bringing the knight to d3. That move is actually very potent because although it should be taken, it's really, I mean, it allows this pawn to start walking into the position, and white might accidentally put the king in the firing line of the bishop here, allowing this, d2. I mean, it's a whole thing. Like, you might actually suffer massive material loss. However, if you're ever up a queen for little material, don't be afraid of sacrificing your queen. Do the math. If you sacrifice the queen for the rook and the knight, at the end of the day, you are still up a horse. So you're still winning, and black has a lot less material. So sometimes when in a position where your king is under heavy threat, the queen has to part ways with the rest of the army, or else bad things will happen. If you try to too desperately keep the queen on the board, it might not work out. And the world actually follows that strategy in this game by simply losing the queen immediately. Anish literally walked in with his horse and allowed the queen to be captured. This would never fly in Bridgerton. So the knight takes the queen on e1, and the world here proceeds to take back, right? And so Anish now goes from being, what is it, like 4 points down or something, 5 points down to up 1 point. Okay, I told you this game was gonna make you stupider. And from this point forward, Anish basically shows that he is, in fact, of an elite quality. And the world of Twitter once again demonstrates that by far it is the worst social media platform and should not have been bought by Elon Musk. It probably should have just been destroyed and turned into a big water park or something. So knight takes g4, and here rook a4, we see this kind of lateral movement demonstrated. c5, and now rook back to a3. Rook a3 is an exceptional move because it legitimately makes negative amounts of sense, and Anish doesn't even take it. So Anish, I think here, is either distracted with whatever it is he's doing in real life or has simply been poisoned by the world. Then he takes, so I don't know what happened there. Maybe he had to sign some documents. Now he takes, and the Twitter noobs just begin walking their king. I think at this point, brain cells have been reduced to a single number. IQ points are basically on the negative side of things. And the king continues to run. The knights and the bishops are not getting involved. Anish here implements what's called a rook lift, moving the rook up and over. And bishop back to d1. So bishop d1 is seeking to remove the knight on g4. The problem is that many moves ago, because Anish can see the future, he actually defended that knight, because he saw 14 million situations into the future like Doctor Strange, and he saw one where his knight would be under attack. So bishop c3. The world here proceeds again not to capture whatsoever. And then here, the sacred move, on move 28, we have en passant. Anish is a man of culture, understanding that when that move is possible, it is like checkers. It is forced. You have to play it. E takes f3. King takes f3. Rook takes h3, and Anish is now up 13 points of material, but perhaps more impressively, he is now swarming the king. In games like this, you have two winning strategies. Three, I should say. Number one is just swarming and checkmating the king, which Anish does in this game. Number two is removing all the pieces from existence, promoting a queen, and then winning. And the third option is to capture all of your opponent's pieces like the second plan, then promote to as many knights as possible and avoid stalemate to implement the strategy of bad manners. The fourth option, of course, is to just lose on time. So, Anish plays bishop h2, the white king now has absolutely no moves, and the black rook, which previously had no way forward, has a way forward. Bishop takes g4, f takes g4, and rook d1 is not avoidable. The only way to avoid it is to delay it by one move and hope that Anish loses internet connection. And unfortunately, that does not happen. And on move 35, Anish delivers the final blow. Rook to d1, checkmate. When I introduced this video and you clicked on it, you most certainly were not expecting such an abomination of a chess game. And I was doing my best to apologize and warn you of what was coming. Anish spent about maybe 20 minutes on his Twitter feed playing against various users, and it was nothing short of a disaster. Disaster would actually be a compliment. Calling this a disaster is an insult to the word disaster itself. But sometimes in chess, we don't need serious content. We don't need content from which we can learn, although even in this disaster, there are things to learn. But let this be a friendly reminder for you all that you don't always need your most powerful piece in order to succeed. Sometimes you need to go off and fight back from a disadvantage, and that will make the victory all the more sweet. I am completely not reading off of a script. I am basically just rambling on because I'm sort of embarrassed of what I've just shown you. I hope you have a very good rest of your Sunday or whenever you are catching this video, whether it is with your daily breakfast ritual, dinner ritual, midday, afternoon snack, sitting on the couch with your dog or your kid, with your family. And yeah, we will go back to regularly scheduled programming quite soon. So I hope you enjoyed this video or didn't. And I'm sorry once again.